The clock that steals dreams. My name is Elias Mercer, and I'm a clockmaker. That sounds simple, mundane. But believe me, there's nothing mundane about trying to tame time. People think a clock just counts seconds. But I know the truth, a clock remembers. It holds stories, every missed appointment, every sleepless night, every goodbye. I take them apart, like the anatomy of a soul. My workshop is old, with wooden shutters that creak in the wind. The walls are faded and cracked, letting in the smell of rain. On the shelves are clocks from all over the state, wall clocks, mantel clocks, pocket watches, alarm clocks, clocks with no hands, ones that have been silent for ages but haven't given up yet. I live in Evermere, a small town in northern Vermont, where people still greet each other by name and autumn lasts longer than anywhere else. There's something unusual about the silence here, it's like it's listening to you. And time itself seems tired, slowing its pace a bit. I don't seek company. My home is my workshop. My friends are the cogs, pendulums, and cuckoos that occasionally emerge from their wooden hideaways, reminding me that some part of the world is still alive. I'm careful with people. Because lately, I've started feeling something strange. When someone walks into the workshop, I sometimes know what they'll say before they even open their mouth. I see fragments of their dreams. Images. Emotions. Pieces. And the more visitors there are, the harder it is for me to remember my own dreams, my own thoughts, my own name. That would scare anyone, but not me. Because I'm already used to something being wrong with me. It happened on a regular, gray Tuesday. The air smelled of burning leaves. I had just finished fixing a pendulum clock, a rare model from 1882. The polished wood gleamed in the light filtering through the dusty window. I was just about to make some coffee when the bell on the front door chimed. A man entered the shop. Tall, in a dark coat, his hat slightly covering his eyes. His face was pale, as if carved from marble. He silently placed a clock on the counter. "It needs to be started," he said in a low voice. I looked at the mechanism. It was a wall clock, incredibly old, with curved glass and copper hands. But the most interesting part was the dial. It had no numbers, only strange symbols, similar to ones I'd once seen in an ancient Latin manuscript. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, looking up. The man was gone. No sound, no trace. I ran outside, empty. Only the wind-chased yellow leaves. For the first time in my life, I felt fear towards a clock. I shouldn't have touched it. But I couldn't resist. My hands instinctively reached for my tools. I unscrewed the back panel and froze. Inside, there was no mechanism, at least, not one I was used to seeing. Just tiny spirals glowing with a faint blue light, and something that looked like a pulsing crystal. I touched it, and the world around me vanished. I stood in a field. The sky was the color of ash. Before me was a girl in a white dress, softly singing a lullaby. I knew her. Her name was, no. I forgot. I reached out my hand to her, and she dissolved into dust. The wind picked up around me, blinding me with dust and screams. I woke up in the workshop. Everything was in place. But the clock's hands were already turning. And the dial showed an image. A dream figure. The same girl. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat, watching the clock, and it showed me dreams. Not mine. I saw a woman dropping a wedding ring into a pond, a boy running away from home into the woods, a man standing over his mother's grave, unable to say a word. Dreams steeped in longing. And each time I woke up, I forgot something of my own. First, client names. Then, part names. Then, the day of the week. And suddenly, I couldn't remember why I became a clockmaker. Why I left Boston. Why I even came to Evermere. I wrote down everything I remembered in a notebook. With each new page, my memories faded, and the dreams became brighter. Then I decided, either I'll find out the truth about this clock, or it will take me completely. It happened on a Wednesday. I always remember the days when something breaks, they carve themselves into memory like cracks in a clock face. It had been raining all morning. A real, persistent rain, the kind that gets under your collar and washes the color out of everything. I was sitting in my workshop, fixing a 1930s pendulum clock. It had been left at the door on Monday, without a note. A wooden case, brass inlays, traces of previous owners, scratches, wax marks, crumbs of time that no one cared about. The second one like it this month. Both with the same weight of silence. When you work with clocks for a long time, you start to recognize their silence. For some, it's light, as if the clock has simply fallen asleep. For others, it's deafening, like a curse. This one was the latter. And I'm not exaggerating, it was like a black hole, swallowing sound. I couldn't even hear the usual spring tension. It was unsettling. Something was wrong with it, not physically, but deeper. I was just about to make coffee when the doorbell chimed. As if for the first time in many hours, I remembered that an outside world existed. Standing at the threshold was an old man in a long dark coat, as if from the last century. A wide-brimmed hat, a cane, everything looked as if he'd just stepped off a Great Depression-era steamboat. "Are you Mr. Mercer?" he asked in a voice like the soft crunch of autumn leaves. "Yes. Come in. You'll get soaked." He looked at me with such surprise, as if he hadn't expected an invitation. But he still came in. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat on the edge of a chair and placed a wooden box on the counter. Small, almost toy-like. I pulled it towards me. My hands automatically began to open the lock mechanism, an old side press clasp. Inside was a clock. But not an ordinary one. It was a silver pocket watch, with engravings around the edge and no numbers whatsoever. Instead, there were strange symbols, like ancient runes or markings from otherworldly languages. The hands were thin, with twisted ends, as if drawing not lines but scars on the fabric of reality. I stared at it in silence. "It needs to." The man paused. "It needs to work again." "What happened to it?" I asked, not tearing my gaze away. "It stopped when it was supposed to show me the last dream." I felt something cold run down my spine. "Excuse me, a dream? You don't know yet that it shows dreams?" He tilted his head. "Then you haven't touched its true essence yet." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't a conversation about repairs. It sounded like the beginning of something else. Something that couldn't be undone. I'll check the mechanism," I replied, more to myself. He nodded and stood up. "I'll return when the clock shows you the first dream. You'll understand when that happens." And he left, leaving behind the scent of old wood, dampness, and something else, faint but very familiar. Maybe fear. I held the clock in my hand. Its cover was cool, but over time it began to warm up. I felt it clearly. Suddenly, the hands twitched. One rotation. Another. Then, silence. And then, darkness. Not the kind that comes at night, but the kind that engulfs you from within. I didn't fall asleep. At least, so it seemed to me. But the world disappeared. The workshop walls vanished. The rain outside the window was gone. Only I remained, and a dream. I stood on a street I didn't recognize. It pulsed. Yes, it pulsed, as if it were alive. People walked past me, but they had no faces. I heard no sounds, no voices, only the ticking of the clock, as if the clock could echo directly into my brain. Then I saw myself. Myself, but different. Older. With tired eyes and an empty gaze. I was saying something, but I couldn't hear myself. On my arm was the same clock. It glowed. And then, everything exploded in a white light. I woke up on the workshop floor. I felt sick. A metallic taste in my mouth. The clock lay beside me. And, it was ticking. It was working. And also? I couldn't remember where I was born. It was a simple thing. A detail I'd known all my life. But it was gone. Like a erased phrase from a letter, like an empty line in a textbook. This dream took it. I looked at the clock, and something in me whispered, "This is only the beginning." When I woke up the next morning, I felt like I'd forgotten something. You know that feeling, like a dream just slipped through your fingers. A moment ago it was right there, breathing down your neck, and now all that's left is an aftertaste, an unsettling, bitter one, like cold coffee. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall. It was quiet. Too quiet. No hum from the refrigerator, no neighbor's dog barking, nothing. As if the world had stopped. And then I remembered. The dream. Or something that was a dream. But at the same time, not. Because everything looked too real. Not like in a dream, where faces change and rooms float. This was clear. Painfully precise. I stood in someone else's house. In a living room draped with dark blue curtains. On the floor, a Persian-patterned rug. On the wall, an old photograph, a man in a military uniform holding a child. And then, in the dream, I knew for sure, I was seeing something that wasn't mine. It wasn't my dream. I got up and went to the kitchen. There, in the corner, stood the same old clock. I found it 3 days ago in the basement behind the workshop. Someone had left it among old parts, between boxes of gears and 20 years of dust. At first, I thought, broken, rare, but nothing more. A strange thing, a dial without hands, and instead of a pendulum, a thin glass tube with dark liquid. And no ticking. But since the night I started it, the dreams began to change. I moved closer. Faint pulsations appeared on the tube, as if something breathing lived inside. And suddenly I noticed, someone had carved a name into the wooden case. Very small, almost imperceptible. I leaned in. Felix Grayson. 1913. My heart quickened. That name was familiar to me. I'd heard it a few years ago, from old Howard, the local historian who sometimes brought me antiques. Grayson was a clockmaker. He lived in our town over 100 years ago. And he disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Rumor had it that he was working on some kind of eternal mechanism that didn't just tell time but could penetrate the subconscious. I never believed in mysticism. Until yesterday's dream. I sat down at the table and picked up my notebook. I drew what I saw, the photo, the curtains, the rug. I started jotting down details. Everything was too real to just forget. But as soon as I finished drawing the child in the photo, it got cold. Not metaphorically. A real chill ran down my spine. And then the clock spoke. Not ticking, no. It hissed. Barely audible. Like a whisper. I approached. The tube with the dark liquid began to glow. And I felt, it was a call. An invitation. But to where? That night, I didn't want to sleep. I left the light on in the hallway. Made myself coffee. Turned on the radio. Worked late into the night. But around 2, I fell asleep at the table, just sitting in my chair. And immediately, darkness. The dream came like an emptiness. No images, just sound. Footsteps. Echoes in an empty house. And then, a voice. You see what others have forgotten. I looked around. No one. Not all dreams are yours. Not all dreams are dreams. I woke up with a scream. The clock was silent. But the tube was empty. The dark liquid was gone. I looked at my hands, small cuts on my fingers. And on the notebook, a new drawing. I didn't draw it. I swear. It was the same house. But the photo was gone. And the child stood on the floor and looked directly at me. This was no longer just a dream. It was a warning. I never could have imagined that a simple clock could so mercilessly change my life. This clock, it wasn't just a mechanism, it was alive, almost like a breathing, thinking creature. And most frighteningly, it wasn't stealing time, but my memories. Parts of myself. That night, as I sat in the workshop, gazing at the strange dial, the tube inside filled with a dark liquid that glowed with a soft blue light. It pulsed, like a heart beating in a chest. I felt as if the clock was waiting for me, ready to show me dreams that shouldn't exist. I closed my eyes and plunged into the darkness, where images appeared, quick as lightning. First, I saw a boy running down a dark street in a forgotten town. His eyes were wide with fear, and he kept looking back. Then a room full of flowers appeared, and in the center, an old woman crying, holding a faded photograph in her hands. The dreams were so vivid that I could smell and feel touches. It seemed like I was inside these stories, like a participant in other people's lives. But with each dream, I felt myself losing something important. In the morning, when I woke up, I started forgetting details from my own life. First, small things, the color of my favorite cup, the smell of the coffee I drank every morning. Then, my mother's face, her smile, and voice. These memories became hazy, like a distant dream. It was unsettling. I realized that every dream the clock let me see became a part of my reality, but I paid the price with losses. Losses of myself. And I began to search for answers about this mysterious clock. In the town library, I stumbled upon old newspapers and records that told of Felix Grayson, a clockmaker who lived in this very town over 50 years ago. They said that Felix also found this clock and that his life ended mysteriously. His last words in his diary were about dreams that became a nightmare for him. I felt like I was following in his footsteps, but with each passing day, I understood, I was standing on the edge of an abyss. To stop meant forgetting everything I loved and who I was, but to move forward meant gradually disappearing. In the workshop, I began to experiment with the clock. I tried to stop the mechanism, but the hands slowly turned back, as if the clock had a life of its own. Each dream reappeared in my consciousness, like a warning or a call. One day I had a dream that was radically different from the others. There was a bright hall with large windows, through which the sun poured in. In the center stood a girl whose face I couldn't quite make out, but I felt warmth and peace. She extended her hand, as if inviting me into her world. Then an inscription appeared on the wall: "Memory is not just the past, it is a bridge between souls." Upon waking, I realized that these weren't just dreams, they were parts of human stories, entangled in time and space. Perhaps the clock was providing access to souls lost in their own dreams. I began to doubt that the clock was a curse. Maybe it was a gift? Perhaps it offered a chance to preserve someone's memories, even if it cost me my own. But then a terrible thought seized me: what if I forgot myself completely? Would I still be alive then? Would I become just a shell carrying other people's stories? Despair engulfed me that night when I woke up and couldn't remember my best friend's name. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I knew I had to make a decision: stop the clock or surrender to its power completely. In the morning, I went to the workshop, ready to take a step into the unknown. The clock glowed softly, as if waiting. I touched the hands, and at that moment, the world around me began to blur. But instead of fear, I felt peace. Perhaps this was the beginning of the end, or the beginning of a new life. All these dreams, all these stories, they were now a part of me. And I, a part of them. Ever since I found this clock, my life has never been the same. I lived in constant tension. Each new dream that came with the evening's sleep was both a mystery and a test. This time, the dream was different. It didn't just show someone else's story, but seemed to warn me. In the dream, I saw a huge house on the outskirts of Riverside, surrounded by a thick fog. It stood silently, forgotten by everyone, and through the windows, shadows moved like ghosts. But what struck me most was a little girl standing on the doorstep of this house. She looked directly at me, her eyes full of sadness and anxiety. I heard her voice in my head, but the words were unclear, as if she was asking for help, but fear held her back. Waking up, I felt an unusual excitement, as if that dream wasn't just fiction, but a real message. So I decided to learn more about this house. Finding an old map of Riverside, I started looking for information in the local library, but there was very little data about the house. It seemed to have vanished from people's memories, as if it had never existed. But the next night, the dream returned. Now the girl showed me how she was running through the dark corridors of the house, hiding from someone or something. I saw blood dripping from her hand, and the voice called to me again, compelling me to follow her. A feeling of hopelessness and fear overwhelmed me, but I understood, I had to help. One thought tormented me: what if every dream from the clock was connected to someone who needed saving? Why had I become the one who saw this and had to intervene? And how many parts of myself would I lose again in this process? I started packing for a trip to Riverside, planning to personally visit this cursed house. However, a sense of unease lingered. Something about this story was deeper and scarier than I could imagine. Before leaving, I reread all my notes, trying to make sense of the dreams. It turned out that the clock wasn't just showing dreams, it seemed to choose me as a mediator between the world of the living and lost souls. And every dream I saw was connected to the unfinished business of these souls. To save them meant to help them find peace, but the price was always high, losing a part of myself. With this thought, I got in the car and set off. The fog thickened, and the world around me seemed increasingly surreal. Every kilometer brought me closer to an answer, but also to new questions. When I reached Riverside, evening had already enveloped the town in darkness. I stood before the house I had seen in my dream, old, covered in moss, with crumbling windows and doors that creaked at the slightest touch of the wind. A chill ran down my spine, but I couldn't turn back. Taking a few steps forward, I felt time around me slow down. As if the clock had started to measure moments differently, every sound, every breath gained significance. Opening the door, I saw an interior where everything was as if frozen in time: dust, cobwebs, old furniture that hinted at past events. The search for the girl began immediately. I called her name, but the only answer was silence. Only a faint sound of footsteps from deeper within the house confirmed that I wasn't alone. I plunged into the darkness of room after room, each seeming to hold its own story of pain and loss. And then, on the threshold of one of the rooms, I saw her, the same girl from the dream. She stood with her arms crossed, looking at me with eyes that held more than just fear. There was expectation, hope, and a plea for help. "Did you come?" she asked softly. My heart pounded as if it wanted to escape my chest. I nodded and took a step forward. This was the beginning of a story that would change not only her fate, but mine as well. And I knew, no matter how many dreams the clock showed me, I couldn't abandon this path. Because in every dream, a part of me, and in every action, a chance to find myself again. When I woke up after that dream with the girl in the fog, the air in the workshop was heavy. The wall clock showed 6 in the morning, but I couldn't fall back asleep. Something in that gaze, a silent cry for help that chilled me to the bone, wouldn't let me rest. Throughout the next day, I tried to work, fixing old Mr. Glover's pocket watch, but my hands wouldn't obey. The image kept flashing before my eyes, the house in the fog, the creaking stairs, and that same girl with pale cheeks. I needed to find out if this house actually existed, or if it was just another fictional dream space. In the evening, I got out a town map and began studying the outskirts of Riverside. In the northwest, almost at the edge of the forest, an old estate, Westmore Manor, was marked. I'd heard about it once. They say a tragedy happened there in the mid-20th century. A family disappeared, leaving no trace. Since then, the house had stood empty, untouched. It had to be the same house I saw in my dream. It couldn't be a coincidence. The next day, I took a flashlight, a warm cloak, and set out. The crunch of snow under my feet accompanied me on the way. The air was bitingly cold, but a strange determination pulled me forward. As I approached Old Westmore Manor, my heart tightened. Everything was exactly as in the dream: peeling paint on the walls, weathered shutters, and even the gate that creaked when I touched it. I looked up, no one. But as I drew closer to the door, a clear imprint of small feet remained on the porch. A child's footprint in the snow. I stopped. My heart pounded wildly. No one around. But the footprint was there, fresh, deep, real. Not a dream. I pushed the door. It was unlocked. Slowly, I went inside. It smelled of dust and cold. The walls were peeling, the furniture covered with sheets. I went further, passed through the living room, and found myself by the stairs. The same stairs from the dream. On the second floor, silence greeted me. In the hallway to the right, a child's room. All the toys were scattered. In the middle of the room, an old music box. I touched it, and it played. The same melody I heard in the dream. I knelt down. There was something too profound about all this. Something the clock didn't just show me, it led me here. Why? For what purpose? I turned around, and saw an old photograph on the wall. In it, a family, father, mother, and a girl. The same girl. The same large eyes. Something had happened here. And I felt, this story wasn't over yet. I had to learn more. I went down to the basement. The darkness there was thicker than night. I turned on my flashlight. Among old boxes and cobwebs, I found a box of documents. Among the yellowed papers, the girl's mother's diary. She wrote about a wonder clock that appeared in their home. About the dreams she started seeing. And about how these dreams began to become reality. She then wrote about fear, about the girl who spoke in her sleep every night with someone invisible, about a shadow that wandered the hallway when everyone was asleep. The last entry was short. Today the girl said she didn't want to see dreams anymore. But she didn't wake up. She fell asleep and hasn't woken up for 3 days. We don't know what to do. The clock broke. We broke with it. I closed the diary and felt a shiver run down my skin. Was it the same clock? Could it have existed before it came to me? Returning home, I couldn't find peace. The clock, now sitting on my desk, was ticking again. Its glass face glowed again. But this time, there were no dreams in it. Only emptiness. As if someone was looking at me from inside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat before the clock and waited. But instead of a dream, I heard a quiet whisper. Not in my head, not in my ears. In the room. A child's voice. Barely audible, I don't want to be alone anymore. After that evening at the house on the outskirts, I couldn't sleep peacefully anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, those childlike drawings, made by a frightened hand, and the rustle of footsteps behind the wall, reappeared before me. It was as if the house didn't want to let me go. Or perhaps, I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I returned to the workshop, but something within me had changed. I was no longer just a clockmaker. I was a witness to something, forgotten? Hidden? The clock that stole dreams no longer seemed like a marvel to me. It was a key to something old, powerful, and dangerous. I spent most of the day poring over old local newspapers. I needed to find out who owned that house. After several hours of searching, I stumbled upon a brief mention. In 1967, the Villers family disappeared without a trace from their house on the northern outskirts of Riverside. Police closed the case due to lack of evidence. No photographs. No details. Silence. I reread the passage 10 times. The Villers. The girl I saw in my dream could have been one of them. I returned to my clock, the same one that showed dreams. I touched the dial. It was cold, like stone. For the first time, it was silent. That night, I didn't wait for the clock to show a dream. I forced myself to sleep, holding it in my hands. Darkness. Then, a knocking. Even, muffled. I found myself in the same house. But now everything was different. The ceiling was crumbling, the doors hung loose on their hinges. The air smelled of dampness and old wood. The walls were covered with scratches, not chaotic, but ordered. I ran my fingers over one of them. They were letters. I am here. I flinched. Looked around, no one. But I heard a voice. Not a scream, not a whisper, something in between, like a radio tuned to a foreign frequency. The voice came from inside the walls. You found me. It said. I approached the wall, pressed my ear against it. Something scraped inside, like nails on wood. Then the voice again. They walled us in. But dreams have no walls. I stepped back. My palms were sweaty. This wasn't just a dream. I was there. And suddenly the girl reappeared. She stood in the corner, holding a toy, a teddy bear missing an eye. Her eyes looked straight into mine. Don't leave me here, she said. He's still listening. Who? I asked. She pointed to a clock hanging in the hall. The same as mine. But its hands were moving backward. The clock started ticking faster. The world around me trembled. Wake up, she whispered. Quickly. And I jolted awake from the dream. It was still dark. The clock lay on the table, its hands stopped at 5 o'clock. I sat for a few minutes until my breathing evened out. For the first time, I realized, the clock doesn't just show dreams. It preserves them. And, perhaps, feeds on them. The next day, I decided to go back to that house, this time with a flashlight, a notebook, and my tools. I didn't know what I was looking for. But I felt I had to return. When I entered, the air was cold and bitter. Everything was as in the dream. I approached the wall in the hallway, the same one where the scratches were. And they were indeed there. I shone my flashlight over the plaster. The letters I saw in the dream were real. I am here. Further on, a faint tapping. Not imagined. From behind the wall. Like footsteps or fingers tapping on wood. I pulled out my tools and started removing layer after layer. Dust filled the air. After half an hour of work, I hit a cavity. Small, about the size of a child's room. Inside, old toys, scattered books, and another clock. But most importantly, a doll lay on the floor. Its face was worn, as if erased by time. Stitched into it was a name, Alicia Viller. I held it in my hands and knew, it was real. Everything was real. This was no fiction, no delusion. Alicia existed. And she was waiting. I left the house at dawn, with the doll in my hands and the clock in my pocket. Many questions still lay ahead. But now I knew one thing, the boundary between dreams and reality is thinner than it seems. And I had just crossed it. I barely recognized myself. Each day, each new night brought new dreams, foreign yet strangely close, and with them new fragments of my life that slowly evaporated, like sand through my fingers. The clock, this strange artifact that once seemed just an antique, had now become my curse. I remember that evening when everything finally changed. I sat in my workshop, surrounded by tools, parts, the smell of machine oil and wood, but in my head, another storm raged. The clock, positioned on the shelf, softly ticked, and I understood, every second it marked was someone's dream, now unfolding in my consciousness. I saw the dreams of people I'd never met, their joys, fears, losses. These dreams contained everything, from childlike carefree innocence to cruel memories. I saw an old woman who had lost her son, heard her weeping through the hum of this bizarre dream. I felt the cold void that remained after her pain became mine. And what was most terrifying, with each such dream, I lost a part of myself. At first, it was small details, forgetting where I put my keys, the name of the neighbor who walked past my window every day. Then, more important things, what my favorite childhood toy looked like, the words my father spoke to me. And now, I couldn't recall my favorite melody, the one that always played in my soul. I knew I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to find a way to stop the clock. But how? This object seemed to live by its own will, defying my attempts to break or burn it. It silently and stubbornly dragged me deeper into the abyss of other people's dreams. One evening, I noticed that the clock had started showing new dreams about me. My own memories and dreams began to mix with others. I saw myself as a small boy running through a sun-drenched field, heard my mother's voice calling me home. But all of it was dim, like a distant echo. I barely recognized myself. Then, in a dream, I saw my own face, but not as I remembered it. A face that changed, blurred, like water on glass. A voice in my head whispered to me that time and memory are two sides of the same coin. If I continued to let the clock control my life, I would lose myself forever. I woke up, sweating, my heart pounding wildly. This time, I understood, it was time to act. The next day, I decided to drive to an old antique dealer in a neighboring town, about whom I had heard many legends. They said he knew more about ancient artifacts than anyone else in the area. I packed my things and set off, not knowing what awaited me. Thousands of thoughts swirled in my head, but one idea was clear: stop the clock to save myself before I completely disappeared. When I finally met the man, he looked at me intently, as if peering into my very soul. "You seek a way out of the labyrinth of dreams," he said quietly. "But be careful. Every answer has its price." He told me about an ancient ritual that could sever the connection between me and the clock, but this operation required great courage and sacrifice. I stood at a crossroads: risk it and, perhaps, forever lose a part of myself, or continue to live captive to other people's dreams, gradually fading away. This choice became my hardest trial. And I knew that the next night might be the last time I saw the world as it truly was. The word clock constantly reminded me that time was running out. I sat in my workshop for a long time, pondering this mysterious ritual, gazing at the strange clock that silently hung on the wall, like a living witness to my destiny. Its dial, which instead of hands showed the dreams of other people, had long since become both my curse and my blessing. Every dream I saw through it changed the reality around me, but at the same time took a part of my memory. The deeper I plunged into other people's dreams, the less I remembered about myself. I couldn't live like this anymore. The feeling of my own loss became unbearable. Memories of childhood, the faces of loved ones, the name my father gave me, everything began to blur, like water on sand. Then I realized that the clock had to be stopped, otherwise I would finally disappear into the darkness of oblivion. But this proved more difficult than I thought. I began to study the ancient records I had found with the clock. It turned out that it wasn't just a mechanism, but an artifact imbued with power, feeding on our memories. Every dream it showed was a door to other worlds, but at the cost of one's own self. I felt the threads of my memory breaking one by one, but more than anything, the question tormented me: was it possible to get back what was already lost? Did I have a chance to see my reflection in the mirror again, not blurred and alien? One dark night, when the silence of the workshop became oppressive, I decided to take the final step. I picked up my tools and began to dismantle the clock, every screw and gear, as if trying to find the heart of this mysterious mechanism. I knew for sure that its creator must have left clues somewhere deep within the mechanism, and I searched for them with the last drops of hope. And suddenly, deep within the clock, I found a tiny key, not a simple key, but a symbol that could stop this endless cycle. With a trembling, anxious hand, I inserted it into a lock I hadn't noticed before, and turned it slowly. The feeling was as if the whole world around me had frozen, fallen silent, and even my breathing became barely audible. The clock stopped. The dream ceased to appear, and I finally felt peace. But that didn't mean everything returned to normal. Memory didn't come back instantly. It remained silent, like an old friend who had gone on a long journey. However, I knew, now my life belonged to me, and I could piece myself back together step by step.